Hi, everybody. I'm just going to run through the housekeeping while we wait for a few stragglers to come in from afternoon tea. So this is just a reminder for all attendees to protect themselves and others from the risk of COVID. There's fancy hand sanitizer that smells nice, I can confirm. If you think you might be sick or suspected or confirmed case, don't come. And let the conference organisers know, please. We want to thank all of our sponsors, and particularly our gold sponsor, the National Archives of Australia, who are being represented by our first speaker today. Pop by the exhibitors online in the portal are awesome. Reminder to our on-site attendees to arrive at each session early. Thank you to all of those who are here. You get a prize. Notify the registration desk for lost and found. Take your belongings with you. Delegates with dietary requirements, I hope by now you've found where all the special food is. If not, let somebody know. Remind you about the symposium on Friday afternoon presented by the ASA, NAA and UNESCO about the Australian Memory of the World program. It's a hybrid event. You can register via the conference app. Cut-offs tomorrow night. Don't forget to use the hashtag HereWeAre2022 for any social media you're posting. Just one final plug, the International Space Station's going over about 7:30 tonight from north-northwest across the sky, so if you've got no clouds, get yourself out there and have a look. That's not on this list, by the way. That was just my additional tip. And we've got a few more people coming in, but I just want to start by acknowledging that we're here on the land of the Ngunnawal and Nambi people. Pay my respects to elders past and present, and some really great papers that are going to be happening today. I was really excited when I was asked to facilitate this session. We are kicking off. James, if you'd like to take the stage. I'm going to stay down here because we don't have ramps yet in 2022. And thanks, James. James is the Assistant Director of the National Archives. I'm going to say you do self-described as he works in digital innovation and research. So I said that's the really fancy area where all the exciting stuff's happening. He's going to talk to us about the archival description in the digital space. And over to you. And we're going to do questions at the end. So we'll go James, and then we've got Lisa, and then we've got Katrina joining in via the internet. And so over to you, James. Thanks very much.
Brilliant, thank you. Not quite sure how I fire up this thing, but before I start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Got the presentation up, but... Oh, okay.
Got technical coming.
All right, there we go. Thank you. Okay, so in this presentation, I intend to draw from a range of different sources and projects to provide some reflections, some experiential observations, I guess, and ideas about the implications to archival description of the types of systems as a government archive that the National Archives is receiving transfers from or will receive transfers from, as well as emerging approaches, technologies, problems of access and what that means for descriptive practice. My aim is to provoke a bit of thought or discussion about descriptive practice in the digital environment. And we're often comfortable with our descriptive standards, the series system, the ICA standards, technical standards like EAD, And they've been around for a long time, and they're built into our archival management systems. But digital records, digital systems and transfers are always throwing up new challenges for us. Now, at the recent IPRES conference in Glasgow, and some of you might have been there virtually or even in person, there were a couple of really great keynote addresses. And one of those was by Tamara Evangelistia Doherty, the director of the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives, who gave a really brilliant wake-up call to us about the collection and preservation of the archives of minority groups and communities. It really speaks to that great keynote this morning by Dr. Thorpe. It's well worth listening to if you get the chance when the addresses become publicly available. But another one was by Stephen Gonzalez Monserrati, who's a speculative fiction writer and filmmaker, as well as an ethnographer of data centres and a PhD candidate at MIT in the US. And this is what I want to dwell on a little bit. So he spoke for part of his presentation on quipu, those ancient recordings of knotted strings used by pre-conquest Andean civilizations that date back millennia. Now, the knots in the string has a code, information encoded in decimal or base 10, used for collecting data and keeping records, monitoring tax obligations, collecting census records, information about military organisation and so on. And these types of information should be familiar to all of us. So here we have the informatic background of Andean civilization encoded in a system understood by the users of quipu. Now, these are essentially an information storage device sent from node to node, town to town, basically by a network of trained Inca runners high up in the cloud-shrouded Andes, literally and figuratively an ancient cloud network. Now, in 1583, the Spanish banned their use and ordered them all to be destroyed. And typical of colonisers, they did a pretty good job of it, but enough have survived to tell us something of the story of pre-colonial Andean history. Now, Monserrati's main point is that quipus survived the concerted attempt to eradicate them. Made from woven plant or camelid fibre strings, they're durable enough to survive the centuries and millennia, and they can even be handled today and remain an important part of ceremonial life for the Andean people. That the quipu survived is instructive for us today, at a time, as we all know, when solid-state disk drives don't last more than 10 years and portable storage media have a much shorter lifespan. So Monserrati's point is well made, and I quote him, "For all of our sophistication, durability is not one of our strong suits." He sees this again and again in surviving information artefacts from earlier cultures. Cuneiform clay tablets, message sticks, etched bone from ancient Chinese cultures. The classic example is a 2-volume Doomsday Book, essentially a register of property and land valuations, and I'll talk a bit more about registers later on, that has lasted perfectly intact since 1086. But a millennium later, an effort to encode a snapshot of 20th century British society onto disk was inaccessible within a few short years. But quipus have another lesson that Stephen didn't delve into because it wasn't really germane to his theme, I guess. There's still a lot of debate about their meaning and function. It's known that most information is numeric. However, some people have argued that quipus are also a writing system and that literary quipus exist of chronicles, history and myth. If this is so, we can say that quipus are akin to a data system, then the meaning of symbols and the processes that interpret the symbols have been lost. Now, this shot shows the contents of a file opened in a text editor of records recovered from a 9-track magnetic tape in the collection of the National Archives. Now, we don't know what software was used to create the information. That information wasn't transferred into custody back in the 1980s when this magnetic tape came into custody. So again, we've lost the means needed to interpret those bits. Anyway, what has all this got to do with archival management and archival description? Well, it's a bit like losing the code book for a database system. At a recent special interest group of agencies that create and manage very large amounts of data, one of the attendees mentioned the loss of a code book for a database system. A low-value code book, low-value business system, I should say, so not important, probably time expired. But the loss of the code book meant that the meaning of the data was irrecoverably lost. So ironically, sometimes we're good at keeping the bits, but we're not good at managing and finding the other stuff, the things that are necessary to understand the information. Now, interestingly, again, to return to keepers for a moment, an American mathematician and a pioneer of ethno-mathematics, Marcia Asher, published a code book for keepers called the Code of the Keepu Data Book. Now, reverse engineering a code book from the raw data itself is a fraught process, and its trustworthiness and accuracy is always going to be questioned. And such has been the fate of Asher's book. It's a contested research area. Now, these long vistas of time make me think of census records. And of course, they're a rich source of information, and a lot of us will have used, for example, the UK census records for research, family history at places like Ancestry and Find My Past. What's interesting about census records is that they're usually put away for a long time before they become publicly accessible. So in the UK, it's 100 years, and here in Australia, it's 99 years after the census day. In the UK, census records remain in the custody of the Office for National Statistics, and they're only transferred to the National Archives for public release at the end of that 100-year period. So there's a bit of a risk there. And agencies typically don't know a lot about digital preservation. So when we spoke to our colleagues at TNA a couple of weeks ago, they said, well, we're having to tell them, checksums and fixity checking, multiple independent storage, use open standards-based formats, that sort of thing. But here in Australia, census returns are transferred from the ABS into our custody quite soon after census day. And we basically put them away and we don't look at them again for a long time. Now, that's not to say, of course, that active ongoing digital preservation doesn't occur. We're always monitoring formats, we're always checking fixity, storage, and so on. But how we describe these records now probably won't be revisited again. And this means if you want to preserve and describe all the information that you need to understand the records, because after 100 years, there's going to be no going back to the agency, to ask them, what do you mean by this or that? In fact, our experience is, with digital transfers, there's often no going back to the agency after 5 years because staff have moved on. And as we saw with the code book, information might actually be difficult to find. So with the census returns, we receive some critical metadata whose meaning might be obvious to us now, and it's well documented in several places. So the ABS website, for example, is an excellent source of information for anything you ever wanted to know about the census. So, for example, we have key metadata elements like statistical area level 1 or the SA1 number. Now, the SA1 number is defined in the Australian Statistical Geography Standard, the ASGS, as the smallest geographical area with disaggregated census data available, and averages usually 400 residents. So you have to need to understand and have access to the standards in order to understand the data. So while we can explain the meaning of the data elements in the series registration for the census, should we also be capturing the standard as a snapshot in time, as standards do change, and preserve it with the returns and the control record? So, I dare say the standard will be findable and understandable in 100 years' time? Well, I guess so. But is it worth keeping a copy with the records they interpret just in case? So it's those sorts of risk-based decisions that are important to consider, but they don't often get considered because they're not included in our procedures or policies, or they're dismissed because the thinking is, Well, if we've got the data, then we've got everything we need. Now onto a more familiar description decision. So at what level should these records be itemised? Now, it's quite possible to treat each census return as a record and actually itemise each of them, adding like at one fell swoop 7 or 8 million sort of items to the catalogue database. Or we can itemise by the GA1 number that I mentioned, or the postcode, or we can look at the storage order in which the returns are stored by the form type. Now, there are 6 forms, such as household paper, household online, personal online, meaning we would register 6 items. Or does none of that really matter, and we treat the whole thing as a single data set? So a key point here is that the methods of interacting with archival collections are changing, and users' access and use habits should be considered when approaching decisions around archival description. I'm thinking here primarily around computational access to collections, whereby GLAM datasets are accessed through computational techniques. And there are a number of models for this. For example, you hand over the raw data, like image files from a digitisation project, and let the users do their own thing. So at a recent, I think it was Oz Preserves or a DPC event, the issue of providing access to complex dynamic digital records came up, and Tim Sherratt, the digital heritage guy at the University of Canberra, said, well, just give us the data, we'll have the capability and tools to sort it out. You know, there are several other computational access models that you provide access from your own systems, from your own hardware, your own high-performance computing cluster, whereby the user can run jobs, run scripts and code to analyse the collection, and they can just take away the outputs of those jobs. But not the raw data. So in other words, they're working with the collection in a managed environment. And another model might be is where users have developed their own analytic programs or tools where you can run those over the collections that they're interested in. And another is that, where the archive generates data sets we think will be interesting and make those available. So, for example, through external APIs in the same way that Trove does. I think I'm running out of time, so I just want to move on. Now, a really fascinating development in terms of access and indeed of what's transferred into custody and managed by archives is the sudden emergence of emulation techniques to access not just records but entire systems. And I'm talking in particular about the emulation as a service infrastructure project that's being run out of Yale University, building on previous work by the University of Freiburg in Germany. And the National Archives was involved in the EASY pilot project, and we successfully accessed obsolete formats and complex software-based items that we couldn't access on current machines. So one of those was an interactive library of photographs by the celebrated Indigenous photographer Mervyn Bishop. And this item consisted of a bunch of files copied from a CD-ROM that was included in Mervyn Bishop's application for an Australia Council grant in the late 1990s. Now, we couldn't run the executable on current computers, but a plain text README file told us what we need to run it. In a Windows environment, we required Windows 98, and hardware appropriately spec'd to the late 1990s, for example, a 32-bit Pentium 2 microprocessor. And emulating these within the EASY environment was indeed easy, a lot easier than you'd think. So through emulation, we were able to access the original functionality of this image database. What this does highlight, once again, is the need to capture, preserve and manage the information needed for ongoing access, meaningful access where the record is performed as it was originally intended. So where this emulation work is heading is emulating networked computer environments. And this allows for the emulation of entire EDRMS's business system, evergreen systems like SharePoint and Teams. So instead of exporting records and metadata out of systems, you transfer the entire system. So if this becomes feasible and cost-effective at scale, and I'd say that's some way off, but again, who knows, will become repositories of disk images and software libraries But again, you do need to capture and preserve whatever documentation is necessary to understand those software systems. So a key lesson here, and I think I'd better end here, is that you do need to consider access at an early stage, because access options will be denied you in the future if you don't. So is transferring a flat CSV file from a database enough to meet your access obligations? It could well be. It is critical to transfer and manage it, those other artefacts required to understand the information, the data dictionaries, the code books, the database's entity relationship model, and whatever else can help users understand the raw data. So I've obviously overdone it, haven't I? But so I think my time's up. I'm pretty sure it is up.
Thank you.
And there's the points I've been trying to make.
Someone screenshot them, please.
Yeah, take a screenshot, and I had better leave it there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, James. That was fascinating. And as we're doing questions at the end, I'm going to have to sit on my hands as well. I've got a few questions for later. Thank you for that. Thank you, James, Lisa, and Katrina. James and Lisa, do you want to grab your chairs and sit up on the stage, or we've got some time for questions, and I'm hoping that there will be some arms being raised very quickly. But I might kick off first with in order of presentation for you, James. I'm not sure I'm going to articulate this well. It's been a long day, but I was wondering if you could reflect on the gaps, the skill gaps in digital preservation to manage those. Particularly, I was thinking about the census data a longer time period. Where they're being created by people and then they're being managed by digital preservationists. But there's skill gaps in the middle that might represent some real risk.
Yes, I think you're right. And let me put it this way, that one thing we're finding with Australian government agencies is that a lot of them are creating these big research data sets, BOM, ABS, geoscience, you name it, and they have their own domains, and they're very good within those domains. Now, if that material gets transferred into custody, we don't necessarily understand those domains and the standards and all the rest of it that goes with them. So you're quite right that there is a capability gap there. Now at the National Archives, we're sort of conscious of digital capability, and I think tomorrow Eva Samaras is going to be talking about our efforts around digital capability, but there's necessarily going to be gaps because of the incredible range of information and information domains that are out there in government agencies and which are Commonwealth records, and that therefore, it's our responsibility to manage that stuff. So
the challenge of our time. And Lisa, I was wondering, I was really fascinated by hearing about the collaboration between the two countries and their collections, and my mind immediately went to whether or not there's other collaborations similar to the ones that you talked about happening or in train or...
Yeah, so for, I'm going to say at least a year, we've had an international engagement branch. This is one of the first partnerships that we've actually been working within, and the cycle of dialogues is only a small part of that partnership actually. There's other parts to that program, and much of it has been worked through at this point, and it's going to lead to more as we have conversations through different modes, and we really get into the nitty-gritty with our fellow practitioners. So yes, I am aware that there's a partnership forming with, I believe, with one of our within the Oceania region, and I expect there'll be more to come. I have heard of another, so it is valuable for us to be working with international partners. There's much to learn from people who are working with First Nations materials. There are lots of great protocols being considered across the world, and where we can contribute to that conversation, we absolutely want to. And yeah, it's a fertile.
Thank you. Well, it should be interesting. What a great job that would be. And Katrina, finally, thank you. I was really excited to hear about that archive. It's I spoke about working with climate scientists this morning, so it's front of centre for me to think about not just making our archives accessible to scientists, but making scientists' archives accessible to the world, and particularly Dr. Hawkins. You, in somewhat, answered my question, because it was about the gaps and the things that haven't been yet collected, and the sort of what would be possibly described as the more ephemeral, the graffiti and the fan art and things like that. I wonder if you could reflect on what's being done, if anything, to collect those, or is it just a wish list?
Yeah, there is some material, and we'd hope to include that with the archive at some point. But the photo that you saw, the Be Curious one of the graffiti on the wall, that was just something that was found in Cambridge by a colleague. So I suppose we'd need to have a more proactive documentation process to capture some of that. But I think there will be opportunities for that as the existing archive is catalogued and we're able to make that more available to people. And it's likely that would create offers of other material that others hold. And in fact, someone sent me actually very early on in the piece, someone sent me from British Columbia, sent me a photograph of a Stephen Hawking sand sculpture that had been made on a beach in British Columbia. And I did accession that into the collection.
And now over to the floor. We've got a roaming microphone. We've got Morgan. We've got some questions that have been online.
Yeah, I have a question here from Brad Weir for James. And Brad is asking, do you think that there is a need or a place for a universal language that could be put in place to make cross-agency collaboration easier?
Yes, that's a good question. Cross-agency collaboration. Wouldn't it be nice if everybody understood the series system, and what a series registration is, and our schemas? But I mean, frankly, I just really don't think it's feasible, given just the differences in these domains that I'm talking about. So, at a minimum, we do say, we need a series description to understand the record-keeping systems. We need item metadata to understand, the aggregations of these different hierarchies. But the problem, of course, is when you're talking about big business systems, database systems, they don't map with our item-level schemas, though they do map well with the Australian Government record-keeping metadata schema. But at least at the very minimum, you can get titles, dates, you can itemise, data sets that way. One thing I was going to say with big business systems, they contain millions of database records that don't really fit within our item level control. You can't do it that way, but you can at least itemise them at the level of the data set, can't you? I mean, the universal lingua franca for the archives is the series system. It's just trying to have other agencies understand the series system is a different matter. One thing we've found is when you're talking to agencies about these things, getting the records managers, the data experts, the IT people all in the same room to talk about our archival requirements. So anyway, I've talked too long. I think it's because I can't really answer it.
Have we got any other online questions? Back to the floor then. We've got a question up in the... Hello, Catherine.
Hello, from the gods. Hi, my question is for Katrina. Hi, Katrina. With personal papers, we're often taking things in different, like in tranches over time. But I was interested in the split between the physical and the digital, and that the digital doesn't yet have a place in an archives. Could you just comment about that, and any comments on the approach to appraisal and description, given that you're dealing with something which is partial and not like lots of different sets of papers over time? It was created contemporaneously. So yeah, any comment on that?
Hi, Catherine. Nice to hear from you. So that's a really good question. I think in terms of, I know that Susan is constantly saying, oh, you know, this stops here, and you know, we need to get on with the digital archive, and we very much hope that's going to be a part of it. I think what's interesting about Hawking's archive is that it's a paper. The part that we're looking at is basically the paper artifact for much of it, of a digitally created archive. So we can't fully see the complexity of the different texts and how they are repeated or used in different contexts and all of that kind of stuff. So the idea of being able to sort of trace all the talks that he gave and what their relationship was to each other, that's quite hard with the paper archive. So I suppose that's why I feel the appraisal process is sort of ongoing, and it's a bit like watch and wait. It's also not really fully understanding the significance of all items, and quite a lot of work to sort of put the context back around those.
Thank you, and thank you for that question. That was on my mind too. I think we've got time for... No, we are at time. So I just want to wrap up by saying thank you to James, Lisa and Katrina. 3 very interesting talks this afternoon. That wraps up our day. There's no more housekeeping, so I will let you all go and on to the next. Thank you very much.